Saddle up, folks. It's time for another riveting roundup of the worst places in America. Yeehaw. As a lifelong expert on all 50 states from my vast armchair travels, I'm uniquely qualified to pass judgment on which ones apparently missed the memo on that whole life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness thing. While the list is highly subjective and based solely on my personal whims, I stand firmly behind my rankings. Will your state make the cut? Read on to find out as I fearlessly tell it like it is. Consequences be damned. The gloves are off, so don't come crying to me if you're offended. Now let's get this dumpster fire of a list started. What makes a state one of the worst to live in? High crime rates. Being constantly worried about your safety and security is no way to live. States with high crime rates mean you're more likely to be a victim of violence, theft, or vandalism. No thanks, I'll pass. Crumbling infrastructure, driving over potholes the size of meteor craters, relying on ancient plumbing and electrical systems, and worrying that the next big storm will take out the power for days. Sounds delightful, doesn't it? States with failing infrastructure make daily life frustrating at best and downright dangerous at worst. Terrible schools. The quality of education shouldn't depend on your zip code. Unfortunately, some states don't seem to care much about properly funding schools or paying teachers a living wage. So if you value your child's education, these places should be avoided. Unless you have money for private school, of course. Pitiful economy. Struggling to find a decent job is stressful enough without the state actively working against you. Some have tax codes, regulations, and policies that actually discourage business and job growth. Unless you're independently wealthy, states with poor economies mean difficulty paying the bills and a lower standard of living. No one needs that kind of hardship. Call me cynical, but when a state ranks poorly in most quality of life measures, I have to wonder if the people in charge even want it to improve, or maybe they're just embarrassingly incompetent. Either way, for the sake of your happiness and prosperity, steer clear of these worst states. Your future self will thank you. Now let's get into the worst states to live in America, and we'll start with the South, where dreams go to die. Having spent a regrettable number of years in the South, I can assure you that the states below the Mason-Dixon line are where hope and ambition shrivel up and perish under the oppressive humidity and backward politics. Take Alabama, for instance. This state ranks dead last in education, healthcare, economy, you name it. I'm pretty sure their state motto is, "Thank God for Mississippi, otherwise we'd be last in everything." The only thing that isn't below average here is the crime rate. Roll Tide. Louisiana, the Bayou State, is proudly home to two of the most dangerous cities in America, not to mention rampant poverty and government corruption. But don't worry, the food's great, as long as you don't mind a side of violent crime with your jambalaya. Now let's talk about the heartland, where excitement goes to die. Middle America may be cheap, but there's a reason for that. States like Oklahoma and Kentucky seem to have given up on progress decades ago. Oklahoma's economy is circling the drain. Its schools are severely underfunded, and there's not much to do besides stare at the flat horizon and pop painkillers. Kentucky can't shake its reputation as the nation's poverty and drug addiction capital. And when the most interesting thing about your state is a horse race that lasts 2 minutes, that's saying something. Save your sanity and scratch these southern and midwestern states off your list. The low cost of living just isn't worth the misery. Trust me on this one. The truth is, high crime rates and poverty plague. These states, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, folks. These states are the pits. As a proud resident of one of the best states to live in, I can't fathom why anyone would choose to live in a place where their odds of becoming a crime statistic are higher than their odds of winning the lottery. But hey, to each their own. Take Louisiana, for example. This state has a violent crime rate. That's the stuff of nightmares. Between their charming cities of New Orleans and Baton Rouge, there are enough muggings, murders, and mayhem to fill an entire season of Law and Order, SVU. And that's not even touching on their political corruption and poverty. How does a state with so much culture have so little regard for human life? Your guess is as good as mine. Over in Kentucky, they've got 99 problems and a solution for none of them. Excessive poverty? Check. Terrible health care? Check. Underperforming schools? Double check. The Bluegrass State seems to excel only at two things: making bourbon an enabling drug addiction. But sure, move on down for the Southern hospitality. Oklahoma and Alabama also made the cut for obvious reasons. There's really no way to put a positive spin on states where crime is a leading industry and education is an afterthought. My advice, keep on driving until you reach a state not ranked in the bottom 10 for, well, anything. Your life expectancy will thank you. In all seriousness, every state has good and bad. But when violent crime, corruption, poverty, poor health care, and failing schools all converge, you have to wonder if the good is worth the bad. If you're thinking of moving to one of these states, do yourself a favor and think twice. Your safety and quality of life may depend on it. Poor infrastructure and bad weather contribute to misery. When I first moved to Louisiana, I was thrilled at the prospect of warmer weather and jazz music filling the streets of New Orleans. Little did I know the harsh reality that awaited me. The state's infrastructure is crumbling, and the weather is unbearable for half the year. The roads and bridges in this state are disasters waiting to happen. Every time I get in my car, I feel like I'm putting my life in danger, with potholes the size of small ponds, and overpasses that look like they were built during the Civil War. Getting anywhere takes twice as long as it should because you have to navigate an obstacle course, and God forbid it rains. Then the roads become rivers and traffic comes to a standstill. As for the weather, the humidity in the summer is stifling. Walking outside is like wading through hot soup. My electricity bill skyrockets trying to keep my house at a temperature that won't melt crayons. The winters aren't much better, with constant rain and the occasional flood. The weather extremes give new meaning to the phrase feast or famine. The state government doesn't seem inclined to fix any of these issues. Taxes remain relatively low, while problems compound, and the population continues declining. At this point, moving out of Louisiana seems like the only viable solution to escape the crumbling infrastructure and unbearable weather. The food and music aren't worth the misery. My advice, visit for the culture, but live somewhere else. Anywhere else. Here are some frequently asked questions about the worst states to live in. All right, I'll own up to it. I was a bit harsh in my rankings, but you asked, and I aim to please. Now that you've read my irreverent take on the worst states, you probably have some burning questions. Let me anticipate a few frequently asked questions that are sure to come my way. Do people actually live in these worst states? Of course they do. Millions of decent, hardworking Americans call these places home. My rankings are based on certain metrics, like economy, healthcare, education, and crime rates that don't always reflect what it's actually like to live in a state. There's more to a place than statistics. Why didn't you include West Virginia? With 50 states to choose from, I had to draw the line somewhere. Just because a state didn't make my list doesn't mean it's paradise. Every state has its pros and cons, and what's appealing or appalling to some may not be to others. If I missed your least favorite state, feel free to complain in the comments. I'm always open to new material. Is there any hope for improvement? Absolutely. States rise and fall in rankings all the time as conditions change. Progressive leadership, policy reforms, and civic initiatives can turn things around. Some of today's success stories were once considered worst in certain categories. There's opportunity for every state to get better if people work to improve education, support small businesses, make communities safer, and expand healthcare access. Change may come slowly, but every step counts. While my rankings were all in fun, the issues behind them are quite serious, but having hope and taking action can make a real difference. If we all play a small part to better our communities and states, the future looks bright, no matter where you call home. Well, there you have it, folks. The states you may want to avoid if you're looking to put down roots. I don't mean to judge, but statistically speaking, these areas lag behind the rest of the country in some key quality of life factors. Of course, there are wonderful people and places everywhere, but if I were packing my bags for a cross-country move, I'd be sure to take a hard look at the data first. Because while beauty may be in the eye of the beholder, I prefer my beholder to have affordable healthcare and a low crime rate. But hey, that's just me. To each their own paradise, I always say. Just make sure you go in with eyes wide open should you opt for one of these little slices of heaven. But if you do take the plunge, Send me a postcard and let me know how it goes.